The 2022 season is in the books, and nobody hit for a higher average than Jeff McNeil. With a 326 average, he is your batting champion, won his first batting title. I'll be discussing that in the show. Also, it's playoff time. Who will be on the playoff roster this weekend in San Diego? All that coming on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Well, the Mets won their final game of the season. They advanced to 101-61 on the year, the second best record in franchise history. And with the Braves losing, they have an identical record to Atlanta, but obviously the division goes to the Braves after they won the tiebreaker, one head-to-head. At this point, all you can do is, tip your cap to them, but it is pretty frustrating that these two teams ended up finishing with an identical record because it's hard not to look back at this month in particular and think one of those games, just one, could have meant the difference. But it is what it is. We turn the page to the playoffs. Before we do, though, have to acknowledge what was an incredible achievement by Jeff McNeil. After playing well in the doubleheader, after Freddie Freeman had a little bit of a rough night on Tuesday, it was basically set up for McNeil. All they had to do was bench him. The batting title was his unless Freddie Freeman went 4 for 4. Freeman went 3 for 4, but he did not get that fourth hit. And once he did get out during that game, although he did have a homer and a double, it was all but set in stone, or it was set in stone, that Jeff McNeil would win the first batting title of his career. And what a remarkable achievement for McNeil. To think about the season he's had after the year he had last year. Last year, he hit 251. He improved that average by 75 points this season. He improves on base percentage a similar margin from 319 to 382, slugging percentage from 360 to 454, WRC plus, which measures hitters based on a league average of 100. He was at 92 last year, 8% worse than your league average hitter. This year, he finishes the season with a 143 WRC plus. To think about all the shows I did this past offseason, I did a lot of them where fans wanted Chris Bryant, fans wanted Javier Baez back, fans wanted anybody but Jeff McNeil. They wanted McNeil out, and I consistently said that he was better than Chris Bryant. He was going to have a great season. What he did defensively is unmatched. To be able to play good defense in the outfield, great defense in the infield, you just don't see it. And to be able to hit for a high average, since I even started the show in 2019, I've always said this is a dude that can win a batting title, and he proved it. He did it, and he did it by having a scorching hot September. He finished the year so strong. I think it was nearly half of his final 20 games were multi-hit efforts, and he deserves this. He worked really hard to put that season behind him, and he just had a spectacular season. I mean, Francisco Lindor ends up getting pulled for Jeff McNeil late so that Lindor gets his ovation. McNeil got a couple ovations, got an ovation when they put it on the scoreboard that he had officially won the batting title. When those two guys met, it was symbolic to see them, embrace and hug. And Lindor did say prior to the season he would buy Jeff McNeil a car if he won the batting title. He also later said, I didn't say what kind of car, so maybe a Honda Civic is heading McNeil's way. But to see those two guys embracing, I thought that was kind of the best moment of what was obviously a great game for the Mets. They win 9-2. Trevor Williams comes on after Michael Givens started the game, gives them at 6 innings, 6 strikeouts, finishes his season with a 3.21 ERA. We're going to discuss playoff rosters in the final 2 segments. And the Williams part of it is interesting because he's not going to be in this upcoming series. The Mets just basically burned him. He went out and he threw, 79 pitches today, So you're not going to see him in the wild card round. You could see him in a later round of the playoffs, but he's been so key for them. Mark Canha had a big day. I mean, he went out, he had a 3-run homer, was 2 for 4, scored a couple of runs. James McCann had a decent day with the home run, and Lindor had a bases clearing double. But the Mets win 9-2, and that moment to me was the one that I'll remember from the final game of the season. It was the two of them when Lindor came out after playing 161 games this season. The only game he missed was directly after he slammed his finger in a hotel door. Otherwise, he would have played every single game this season. He played through that finger injury, came out the other side of it, continued to be productive throughout. And Lindor's season, a 270 hitter, 339 on base, 449 slugging, 127 WRC plus, so 27% better than your league average hitter, and the second best WRC plus of his career behind his season in 2018 when he had a 132 WRC plus. He hits 26 bombs, 104 RBIs, 16 stolen bases, 98 runs scored, or I guess he had another one. Did he have another one today? Was I right about that? He did not. No, he just drove in the 3. So 98 runs driven in. All those stats that I read off were prior to the game today. So actually 107 RBIs. But you look at where he was at coming into this final game, a 6.8 F4 made him the 6th most valuable position player in all of baseball behind Aaron Judge, Manny Machado, Nolan Arenado, Paul Goldschmidt, Freddie Freeman, and then you have Lindor. If that RBI double improves his F4 enough, he might just at the finish line cross over to 7. I don't expect it to. Probably finishes here with a 6.9 F4, which if you go back to his career, is the second best season he's ever had to that year in 2018, where he was worth 7.8 wins. So Lindor had a great year. McNeil wins the batting title. I mean, you look at his F4 at 5.9, one of the best players in baseball. Based on that stat, the second best player on the Mets. Obviously, Pete Alonso has something to say about that with the offense this season he had, but the defense detracts from his WAR. Meanwhile, McNeil should, in my opinion, win the utility gold glove this year for what he's done in the outfield and at second base. And he has the 16th highest F4 in all of baseball, tied with Jose Ramirez. So that just shows the value that McNeil brings. And what a fantastic campaign by him and also Lindor as well. That double play combination, I put up there with any double play combination in baseball. I really would. I don't even know who the second place on that list is. It's really, I mean, I'm looking at the leaderboards right now. I don't know. I think it probably is the best double play combination in baseball. And obviously that's my biased opinion, but it's my opinion nonetheless. So good to see the season close on a positive note. The Mets sweeping the Nationals. Now, here it is. Road's out in front of you. You got to go through the playoffs and win. What we're going to do next here, I have Aram Leighton on because I think the most fascinating position battle is who is going to be that right-handed bat. Are they going to go to Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez, or are they going to retreat back to Darren Ruff, who is still dealing with that neck injury but could be cleared for this upcoming series? We'll discuss that with Aram in a minute before I close the show on just what the roster will look like overall. But first, I want to tell you about BetOnline.net, which is your number one source for all of your football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So on today's show, discussing the playoff roster. So I want to bring my guy Aram Leighton on. Our top 100 at Just Baseball just went out. We're going to touch on that a little bit, but I first want to focus on the playoffs and really what's been a problem for the Mets all season. They have not found anyone who could fill that DH role against left-handed pitching. It was JD Davis. Then it was Darren Ruff, one of your favorite players. Ruff has been bad in a Mets uniform. Went on the IL with a neck sprain. They said he could be back for this series. We'll get to him in a minute. Mark Vientos, when JD Davis was getting consistent at bats in June, I was on my soapbox, and I have been all year, saying Vientos is big league ready with this bat. Get him up, get him some seasoning. They call him up after the Ruff experiment fails. He has, I think, less than 50 plate appearances at the big league level. Talk about just what you think of Vientos' future as a big leaguer and the way they've handled him this season.
Yeah, I think those are two important talking points here because you talk about the top 100 list that we just released, and Mark Vientos is in the back end of that top 100, and that's a testament to the bat because you're not getting much value with the glove, as you and other Mets fans know. But what Mark Vientos did all year long, even with the slow start to the season, was demolish lefties. He seemed to be the perfect candidate, which I'm sure you talked about plenty. On this podcast to fill that role, a 1,000. I think he had an 1,100 OPS left against lefties in AAA this season, and I just don't think he got the opportunity to really get acclimated to the big leagues. And I understand that there's a lot of decisions that you have to make and a lot of roster moves, and rookie seasoning is not your priority. But I actually liked a lot of the ABs I've seen from Vientos as of late. I've started to see him get more comfortable. I call to a specific game where I'm watching him against Jesus Luzardo, who was shoving. He had a lot of really good takes, fouled off tough pitches, and it looked a lot different than what he looked like in the beginning of his big league stint. I really think if he had another 50 to 75 plate appearances under his belt, we would have seen him at least getting comfortable enough where he could have been that platoon guy. There's some issues with right-handed breaking balls and things like that might hold him back from, ultimately being that impact everyday guy, but he crushes lefties enough at this point, and I've seen enough that if he had enough ABs, I really think he could have been a contributor there.
And what frustrates me, and look, when the Mets promote Francisco Alvarez, what am I going to do? I hop on Locked On Mets and I hope traffic because, of course, I do. It's Francisco Alvarez in a big uniform. I'm going to get excited.
Yeah.
The more I've had some time to think about it, they just exasperated the issue. And it's, again, kind of a mishandling of Mark Vientos because if he's going to be the guy in the playoffs, you could have at least given him a series in Atlanta with high stakes to get those at bats that then went to Alvarez. Now, by calling up Alvarez, it was almost an admission that they weren't going to use Vientos. And I guess they were thinking that the talent level on Alvarez was enough that you could catch lightning in a bottle and he could run into some homers. What do you think about when they called him up? And if he really could, if they decide, you know what, we're just going to ride talent and go with Alvarez on the playoff roster instead of Rafi Vientos, is he just that good of a star level, future star level player? He can just rise to the moment, or are they just throwing him in the deep end and he has no chance?
The thing with Alvarez, man, is I think it's easy to forget how young he is. And that's the thing. He's 20 years old, right? Extremely talented. We've seen him climb through the minors so quickly because of his just ability to crush mistakes as well as anybody in the minor leagues. And he's also learning slowly how to be a more well-rounded hitter. And I think he's getting there. But there are some holes in Alvarez's game that got exposed a bit at the AAA level. And that's what made it a bit surprising to see him get promoted to the big leagues. Alvarez is going to be one of the best catchers in baseball. I really do believe that. But I think we can separate these 2 points here and say, hey, he missed a big season in his development in 2020, made up for lost time, and it's easy to forget how young he is in terms of ABs under his belt professionally. And when it comes to high fastballs, those have been eating him up all year long. I've texted you about it a ton. And when he got to AAA, it was something that specifically was a problem for him. I mean, he was whiffing at 31% of fastballs in the zone. And the scouting report became attack him with heaters. The thing is, Alvarez has barely been in the big league so far. And I don't think teams have really game planned for Francisco Alvarez. You look at what pitches he's seen the most of so far in the big leagues, he's actually seen more sliders. So I don't think teams were really doing their homework, the Nationals, or, if he's coming off the bench, I don't think teams really are that focused on the report there, except you do call back to that one series where he comes in, big spot in the ninth, and what do they get him with? Gas elevated. If he's in the playoffs, it's going to be more catered to his weaknesses. And I think the fastball weakness was a little bit too pronounced in AAA for me to say, hey, this guy can just go into the big leagues where high spin fastballs are in vogue and be able to just make that translation right away. I think that's going to be somewhat of an issue for him. And it's not like he's a lefty masher, right? He's a guy that's just crushed mistakes. He's going to be a really well-rounded hitter ultimately, but this is a big hole for him to just be able to not only jump up from AAA, but get to the big leagues and satisfy that issue that was already bothering him in Triple.
And, I look at the road the Mets are going to have in the playoffs, assuming they're able to make it out of the first round against the Padres, where they will face Blake Snell, where you would want one of these guys in the lineup. You're going to go against the Dodgers where you got Julio Urias, you got Clayton Kershaw, you got Tyler Anderson. So the role is going to be required in that next round. But to me, as much as I still could see the Mets going Alvarez, just based on the fact that they promoted him in the first place, I believe Vientos would give better at bats in the playoffs. But I also am curious what your take is because with Darren Ruff, he has been as bad as you can imagine in a Mets uniform. I mean, the numbers, I'm going to do him the favor of not reading them to you. They've been awful. He hasn't hit a home run, no power, very few hits, just uncompetitive. But he's a big leaguer. He's been a big leaguer for a long time. If you're making a playoff roster, if I'm making you Billy Epler right now, you have to decide who's going to fill that role for the playoffs. Are you going Vientos, Alvarez, or Ruff?
Man, it's so tough because something I want to acknowledge too is that Alvarez did mash lefties more so towards the end of that minor league season and before getting promoted, because guess what? Lefties in the minors don't buzz that fastball up as well. And you see anything belt and below, he's going to crush that. That's still something that, you can lean on. When he comes in to pinch hit, Alvarez is capable of leaving the yard at any moment. I think what we've seen from Vientos as of late, though, gives me a little bit more confidence in the fact that, he could have better ABs in the postseason. I really think that at bat, and I don't want to make too much of a takeaway from one at bat because he's also had a couple ABs where he's crushed baseballs, as we just saw. But that one AB where he came up in the big spot and saw those elevated heaters in a big game, was it 2 outs when he came in there?
It might have been one out, but yeah,
One
he
out.
had no.
Yeah, like I feel like when the at bat, when you have the mound visit, let's talk about it. That's where Alvarez is going to get picked apart a little bit more. Vientos, I've been really impressed with how much more comfortable he's looked. If you look at his last 30 plate appearances too, not striking out nearly as much. He's
Yeah.
walking more. He's putting the ball in play more. And I think the overall production will come along. Again, I really am impressed with his ability to hit lefties. He crushes velocity as well as anybody. The problem is right-handed breaking balls. You can shelter him from that. I think it's easier to shelter Mark Vientos from right-handed breaking balls than it is from, Francisco Alvarez away from elevated heaters, which just continues to be that thing that's holding him back right now. I would lean Vientos. And, we talked about it before. It's Darren Ruff or Vientos, but you talk about how bad Ruff has been as a Met. Neck sprain, I don't even know what that is. Like that freaks me out a little bit too. You wonder if some other injuries have been part of the reason why he struggled as a Met, but he's been on the big stage. He's done all those things. I will say the way Vientos has looked, that's ultimately my pick here. I think he's getting more comfortable, and the Mets really should give him an opportunity because I do see him blossoming before our eyes. Again, another 50, 75 plate appearances. I think this kid would have been ready to go.
I think so. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes they've made this year is not putting him in the position where he could really thrive in this role. But I do think he is probably the best option as we hit the playoffs here. Thank you, as always, Arm, for joining us. You can find all of his work over at Just Baseball. We just had the top 100 come out. Maybe I'll have him come on at a later date to really dive in because there was 4 Mets in that top 100. Kevin Parada, a new addition. So I'm excited to talk to Arm about Parada for the first time in this show, but we'll get to that at another time. All right, so what will the Mets playoff roster look like this weekend against the Padres? Me and Aram just went through, I think, the biggest debate: who is going to be carried? Is it going to be Vientos or Alvarez, or will it be a surprise Darren Ruff appearance? I think if you lock that down, regardless of who it is, I don't know if they would carry both. I can't imagine they're going to carry both Vientos and Alvarez, but then again, it's a 3-game series. How much pitching do you need? Right now, the Mets have a 28-man roster. They got to take 2 guys off of it. Trevor Williams just threw the 79 pitches. They have a day off. I just don't think that he will be on the roster for at least this first round. Now, when we get into a larger conversation about the following rounds, that's an interesting debate. But for now, let's just take him off. So that brings you down to 27. I think that if you're looking at where to go from here, I just don't think that they're going to carry both Alvarez and Vientos because they basically have very similar roles. Now, because it's a 3-game series, you can make the argument that why did they need Carlos Carrasco and Taijuan Walker? You can make that argument. You could say, all right, well, Carrasco is going to start game 1 of the next series if we need to use all three of our guys. So we're going to shelve Carrasco from the first roster. We're going to put Taijuan on this one in case we need him as a long man out of the bullpen. You can then pull, so it'd be Carrasco and Williams off of it, and that could be your decision. So then that would mean that your rotation for this series is DeGrom, Scherzer, Bassett. You have Edwin Diaz, Seth Lugo, Adam Ottavino, Trevor May, Drew Smith, Joely Rodriguez, David Peterson, and Michael Givens as your guys in this bullpen, and that could be it. Now, if the Mets want, they could get even more creative. Let's just say you feel like David Peterson is enough as a long man. You could go no Carrasco, no Walker, no Williams, and you can carry Alvarez and Vientos. I just don't believe the Mets are going to do that. So if I had to guess, I think they likely carry one of Walker and Carrasco. And it could be, like I said, you're saving Carrasco for a potential next series. So you keep Taijuan in there, and that is the move. Then I believe Terrence Gore has a spot on this roster, at least in this round. And I think probably it's Alvarez. I think that they would leave off and they would roll with Vientos. But considering what it took, what it meant, the significance of promoting a Francisco Alvarez, maybe they'll ride him. Or like I said, maybe they'll leave somebody else off of this roster when it comes to the pitchers and keep all of their position players and go very position player heavy with 14 guys and only 12 pitchers. I think these conversations get more interesting when we get into the next round because assuming the Mets get into the next round, I should say, then you get into who is that four starter? Is it Carrasco? Is it Walker? Does Trevor Williams then crack the bullpen once you get into a longer series? And if he does, who do you take off? Do you take off the other one of Carrasco and Walker, whoever's not going to start? Do you knock off a Joely Rodriguez or a Michael Givens or a Trevor May? I just don't know. I think things are almost in a position here where I think Trevor Williams might continue to be just the tough luck guy that gets left off here. And then if he's off the roster and you're still waiting on Marte, in the meantime, probably one of Vientos or Alvarez that doesn't come back. So the Mets has some decisions to make when it comes to their roster. But when you're looking at this series, and we're going to do a full preview tomorrow with Javi Reyes of Locked On Padres, I think that the biggest question here is that right-handed bat. Other than that, I think you make it easy on yourself. And again, Williams just kind of got burned, and you likely pull whichever starter you're going to save for the following series, and you just keep them off the playoff roster for this particular round, whether that be Carrasco or Taijuan Walker. And hopefully you'll get a Starling Marte back by the divisional series, and that would open up a whole nother conversation. But really, it could be as simple as just removing the kids when it comes to a Vientos and a Alvarez and just rolling with the veterans that you have. The Mets have some decisions when they get to that point, but I think right now the decisions are pretty straightforward. It just comes down to which rookie do you want? And as Aram just alluded to, I think Vientos makes more sense. Vientos has been giving good at bats lately. I believe he has about a 380 on base percentage. Me and Aram are talking post recording there. Over the last 19 games he's been in, is about 31 plate appearances, and his on base percentage was close to 380, slugging percentage over 500. Average is still at 207 or something along those lines, but he's giving you better at bats. They've continued to improve. So I can see the merit there. But I also can see the Mets just saying, look, Alvarez has a better chance based on his moxie to come out in that type of a big time scenario and come through. And if they lean on that and they want to go him, I think you're honestly, based on their limited experience, you're basically picking between a couple of bad options. Just see who you think would fare better in this round against Blake Snell, who could be, I guess, the game 2 starter in this series. But make sure you tune in tomorrow for a full series preview. Again, I should be joined by Javi Reyes of Locked On Padres. It's always fun when you get Javi on the show. As always, though, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter @FinkelsteinRyan. Follow the show @Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on in Major League Baseball. Follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.